Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmar, together with my co-host Mark Ronich, statewide news service and jbiztechvalley.com, and now columnist for the Jewish Press.
Right, I have a column in there called The Albany Beat, and I talk about how government relates to the Jewish community, or doesn't, as the case may be. But I also write about the environment, and something that so our guest today is Mair, who's the president of the national president of the Sierra Club. So we have, not even though you're local, you are the top guy nationally for the environmental group known as Sierra Club.
That is correct, and it's an honor to be here. And so,
welcome to the Jewish View.
Well, thank you. You know,
how many members are in the Sierra Club? You hear about that a little bit. Give us a little bit of a background of how many numbers, what their purpose is.
Well, the Sierra Club was founded in 1892 by John Mair, and thanks to the Sierra Club, you have your National Park Service.
Really? I didn't know that.
It's in fact one of the biggest coups, as they say, was the preservation of then our nation's vanishing natural wild spaces. It was during the height of the industrial era and industrialization in America. We were, as they say, logging the mountains like the Adirondacks down to stubble. And as we started, pulling away the old timber, I mean, massive timber back then, you had, beams that could actually almost fit about half, one tree could fit about half this room in the size of its beam. So they, in a period where we did not have, as they say, large timber was cheaper than steel, old growth forest, was very valuable and treasured. And so we were logging things and stripping away things and digging into the bowels of the earth at incredible rates, at the expense, of these wild places and wild spaces. And so the Sierra Club came about through John Mair, recognizing that this was a crisis and that there were a few places and patches left.
Well, where did John Mair start the Sierra Club?
This was in California,
okay,
and the famous.
You're talking about the Adirondacks being almost leveled, but
the Adirondacks is critical because when it comes to Teddy Roosevelt, you got to talk about the Sierra Club, John Mair, and then the inspiration and what got.
Teddy Roosevelt was president.
But we'll get there. We'll get there. Let me roll with my shtick.
Stay tuned, as I say.
Let me roll with my shtick.
Sure.
But so the thing is that he recognizing that we were losing these wild places to industrialization and rapid resource exploitation, he decided that he had to come up with a way to preserve these. And so one of the most beautiful scenic wonders was out there, was a place called Yosemite Valley, with Half Dome. And he knew that the best way to convince politicians and others to love and protect these wild spaces, that you had to get people to them. You can't protect something that you cannot see and do not love. And so he had the genius and foresight through outings, which is what the Sierra Club is famous for, in getting, then President Roosevelt to come to Half Dome and says, listen, we have to protect these places and look at this beauty. Just think about it. These things are vanishing. These natural wonders, are no longer around. Think about climate change right now. So they were back then looking at those vanishing wild places and scenic places. And so he's saying, listen, in our lifetime, these things, if we don't come up with federal protection, we will lose these things forever. And so Teddy going out there, like anybody who's going to Yosemite Valley, it's like, you want to talk about the most natural tabernacle that God could ever create on earth. You go there, you fall to your knees, and it's just that beautiful. And that had the profound impact on Teddy Roosevelt. So there's this iconic photograph that if you ever go into the state capitol or look in the Sierra Club or just look in Teddy Roosevelt's own archives, is him with John Mair at Half Dome. And there's a massive plaque right there, and then from there, he took up the cause, and he recognized how valuable the natural ones. And remember, Teddy Roosevelt was he was a sickly Roosevelt when he grew up, so being a macho man and going out in the wild was a very big thing. And so when he saw this, and that there were these few places left, he pushed back and says, listen, we need to protect these places. So you have Yosemite, you have Yellowstone, all these natural parks and wonders and places were then, set aside and protected as forever wild for Americans and their posterity. So the Sierra Club was critical in building the awareness with politicians and using that political power to, as I say, to create those agencies and those rules and those regulations that would set things aside. And what's really important about, and why does it tie back to the Adirondacks? Because Teddy Roosevelt comes from New York.
Right.
And you have the great houses up in the Adirondacks, and you do have those few patches, up in the Adirondacks. And so the Adirondacks and it being deforested was a perfect backdrop that could drive home that Teddy could understand of what, Yosemite and the last remaining wild spaces in America could look like. And so I think that operating with that in mind, not only did he move forward to protect these wild spaces, but also the early legislation with regards to then protecting what was then the Adirondacks and trying to restore it to its natural one. Because most people right now in America don't realize, and even in New York State, that the Adirondacks is like basically second and third growth. It's not old growth. So you can imagine how much of it was, how much was clean lock. You go down to West Point, inside, in fact, inside of Thayer Hall or inside of the great cafeteria, and you look up at the massive wood beams that hold up this, that's Adirondack timber.
Yeah.
It's old Adirondack timber there. You don't see that anymore because it's long gone. So the Sierra Club has played a profound role in preserving what is wild and what is protected in America and shaping public and national policy in that regard. As to members, 2.4 million members, supporters, and volunteers. If we were a state in the union, we would be the 32nd, 33rd state in the union. But I have no such budget and no such power. But one of the things that's very good about, they are active and they have a high voting turnout. So you talk about a juggernaut of influence. As an NGO and as a national environmental organization, it is one of the largest, oldest environmental organizations and NGOs in the country. And so it's really been an honor to be elected their president. So they didn't go out and one day and say, hey, we need to get a president. Oh, by the way, there's a black guy. No, you have to run. And as Mark knows, I have a pretty impressive environmental resume with regards to my battles to protect the Hudson River, General Electric, but even right here in Albany with regards to shutting down and transitioning the Answers incinerator.
Tell us about that, because, obviously we care, California obviously is very, very beautiful, is what you say, of course, but, people like we're fairly local, so people would like to know about the local issues, that environmental.
Well, we have a number of local issues, and one of the things that you find from an environmental justice lens, recognizes that depending upon your socioeconomic status, you tend to be on the receiving end, as I say, of negative amenities. By negative amenities, think of that as things that municipalities and governments must do for the betterment of society, for it to function. And there are positive amenities, or things by which people enjoy. Parks, for example, is a good positive amenity. Public parks, building public parks, acquiring land for public parks, but creating sewage treatment plants, utility easements and what have you. And what they found is that there's been an imbalance between how these things are apportioned. So poor, disempowered people tend to be the fence line communities where things that we have to have them, but we're going to cite, yes, we're going to put them in these neighborhoods. But if there's a positive amenity like a park, which will actually add to a property value if you live next to a park or a school, we're going to build that right over here. And so these things, as you know, poverty and power also flow along ethnic lines in this country, sadly, because we have some bad legacies. But that being said, the Answers incinerator, which provides power for the entire New York State government complex, is sited in a low-income, predominantly black community. And up until 1994, they burned garbage for a 8 to 9 county regional waste shed. So all the garbage was burnt in this incinerator. And the revenue stream that came from that, anywhere from 5 to 8 to sometimes as high as $10 million, went to the city. And do you think that the city would put it in one park or some sort of offset, that says, for the burden that we get for burning everybody's garbage in your backyard, we will do this for you? Not a dime. What that did do is it went to just about everywhere. So even money's a positive amenity, and it went to everywhere else in the city but the community that bore the burden of burning garbage. What the community did get from burning garbage is elevated levels of blood lead levels. Children were getting lead poison. People thought it was paint, but actually it was one of the byproducts of this incineration. A lot of autoimmune diseases and disorders because people's immune systems, when they're exposed to dioxins and furans that are byproducts of burning chlorinated paper, they were exposed to this. And I mean, mind you, the plant often malfunctions, so even though it was the state of the art. If you look behind the state education building, you see that big black smokestack. That was state of the art back in the 70s. And the reason why it's that tall is supposed to carry the poisons and toxins from incineration aloft. But the plant's located in Sheridan Hollow. And if anybody knows anything about a hollow, think of it like a hat. It's down the bowels of the hat. And on two sides of the hollows are hills. One's Capitol Hill to the south, and Arbor Hill and West Hill in North Albany to the north. The prevailing wind around here, is out of the south, blowing north. So those winds carry that soot and that ash over these communities.
There was a story I heard where someone was talking to Mario Cuomo at the executive mansion, and there was soot coming over, and it was actually raining down on them while they were having this conversation.
Oh, well,
And he was saying, where's this coming from? And when they said it was the Answers plant, he immediately put an end to it.
Well, it was a little bit more than that.
Since
this is the season of the holidays of light. It was one of those special miracles because we had strategized up until then. We had worked with the Mansion Hill Neighborhood Association. Mind you, Arbor Hill wasn't by itself. Neighborhood associations came together to backstop our community. It's one of the things I love about the city of Albany is that it's a city where the underdogs sometimes get together and take on the palooka. And in this case, the palooka was the state government and the mayor of the city of Albany at that time. And the mayor at that time was Tom Whalen, and the governor at that time was Mario Cuomo. Tom Whalen is not one to give up a good thing like finance, and Mario Cuomo was not one to start talking about a new energy plant that may cost billions to build. And so, let's kind of like sweep this thing under the rug. So we networked with a number of neighborhood associations like the Mansion Hill Neighborhood Association. And I want to give a shout out to Larry Becker and Ellen Becker, two attorneys, and a guy by the name of Chris Mercoliano and his wife Betsy Mercoliano, who headed up the Free School. And working with these communities and the various other coalitions, we said that, listen, we're going to do a day of outrage, that the next time we have an upset, and this was in the dead of winter, we're going to definitely show up, really storm City Hall and picket. And why in the winter? Well, we already know that when this plant had its upsets, which was almost daily, it spewed black ash because it was incomplete combustion, and along with the mixing of the soot from the oils. Think about a poorly burning oil lamp, the black stuff, the soot that comes out of it. And so when this stuff basically comes together, it makes an ugly, heavy cocktail, and we have what we call black snow. So not only did this upset happen, but it happened in the wake of us having a protest at the top of the hill during Martin Luther King holiday weekend, in which there was going to be a march. And one of the first times in the state of New York that they canceled the state march was when they saw all the poor families from Arbor Hill and Sheridan Hollow and Mansion at the top of the hill, and they had canceled the event due to weather. Reality was that they did not want to march up and run into a gauntlet of people who, on the height and in memory of a civil rights hero, recognized that New York State has a very serious civil rights problem when it comes to poor people as it relates to the environment and money. So we were confronted by the press and say, hey, the march is canceled, and what are you guys going to do? And I paused for a second. I said, so I guess we need to talk to the governor. They go, well, the governor's going to be entering over the convention hall. They showed us, they just kind of pointed over there. I said, that's where we're going to go meet the governor. And so we went over there and confronted the governor. And there was a famous video that he would take up the matter, and if it was proven to be of harm to the community, that he would take immediate action. And so that was the video footage of him committing on air before New York State at this important holiday event that he would take action. And then the rest is the miracle, because we had a fresh coat of snow. It snowed and it blanketed the whole capital region. And at the end of that snowstorm, because they needed more power to heat the Empire State Office complex, they had to bring in an extra load of garbage and an extra load of No. 8 crude oil and cook it up to heat and keep the complex warm. But the plant choked on this waste and oil, and it launched and belched the largest pile of black soot and goo into the atmosphere. And you could, if you had a helicopter and looked down, you would see the whole capital and the whole city blanketed in white, and then there was this big black swath going all the way down to Glenmont, New York, that came out of this plant. And not only did it cover going all the way to the south, because usually the winter winds are coming out of the south and blowing north.
Right.
The wind, this was one of those times, a miracle that it just carried it not
South.
only south, but right over top of the governor's mansion.
Right.
And so that's where that special blessing from on high came down.
And the governor was outside and asked someone, I think there was some interaction.
Oh,
with
yeah, well,
someone,
there was the news. The
and-
news showed up. You know,
and there was this,
you-
and the governor was like, well, where's this?
Yes,
You know?
and so that was the first, at least, so it is said officially, that was the first time the governor really had to wake up and deal with
Right.
what the residents of Arbor Hill were dealing with
For many years.
for almost 10 years,
Right.
ritually. And when he saw this, he said, well, this is intolerable. This
Right.
is, if human beings are dealing with this, we got to take action. And within weeks, he summoned in the heads of OGS and others, and
shut the plant
they
down.
shut the plant down.
Yeah.
And so that was a huge, but it was one of those things where direct organizing, direct action, and collaboration with our Albany, Council of Albany, New York, CANA, neighborhood associations coming together, planning an action, and then turning out. Because the other piece was not just him coming to this epiphany, it's the pressure of the community. It's one of those things when downtown city wards come together. When people work together, tremendous things can happen. I wish they were working together more so, now than ever. But that being said, it shows you that when people are organized and come together, they can absolutely make significant environmental action that helps human health.
I wanted to just back up for a minute. When you're talking about the Adirondacks, and you're talking about Teddy Roosevelt.
Yes.
There's something.
You went around there, Mike.
There was a point that I wanted to ask you about, and I was almost just missed it. It's amazing that the Adirondacks didn't become part of the National Park Service, that even though Teddy Roosevelt was from New York and
Right.
he knew the beauty of the Adirondacks, it's 6 million acres.
Right.
What is it then, part of? What do you mean?
It's a state park. It's the
a state
largest state park in the country.
Yes.
And it's
And you
not
can fit almost all of our national parks inside of it.
Yeah.
Really? Is that big?
It's that big. It's that big. It's that huge. And I would say that really, Mark, goes to the issue of why we have the most expensive Capitol building that is the most ugly monstrosities. When you realize...
You don't like our Capitol building?
Well, as I say, I like fits and starts of it because it's a fits and start building. When you compare it to our nation's capital, and in its day, it's built right around the same time, around the Civil War, and yet it cost almost twice of what our nation's capital.
I know, but it's such a beautiful building. It's like one of the 10 most architecturally beautiful buildings in the world.
For the money that they spent on it,
at this point, doesn't matter.
Well, the point of the matter is that inside, well, first of all, externally, again, this is beauty's in the eye of the beholder.
Well, you know why there's no dome on our cap. We're one of 9 capitals without a dome.
The cash overflow. But you may correct me.
Well, it was that there was Tammany Hall era.
Oh, absolutely.
And all that. So they decided just to build the staircases
Right,
on each side.
The $1 million
No,
staircase?
on either side of the
Okay.
outside of the Capitol.
Okay.
And they built 17 steps on the west side and 76 steps on the east side. So it's 1776. So
Right.
that's
It's really, listen, I'm not going to say that they were short on symbolism,
Yeah.
but it was very costly, and there was a lot of fortunes that were made, and it still doesn't take away from the fact that every time I go down to Washington, D.C., I get to tell people, I says, look at that beautiful, where our Congress and our Senate and the early Supreme Court met.
Yeah.
Look at this beautiful building, and you go inside the rotunda and everything, and then you come back to Albany.
And you got a different beautiful building.
And well, it's different. It's a special
different,
building.
beautiful
But
building.
from the eyes of this beholder, from a distance, when I look at the Peel and I talk about the majesty and strength of New York State, I said, it is truly a tribute to the state of New York, because the potential, the power at twice the cost, but less the beauty, is a quintessential New York testament. So I think it's a testament to Tammany Hall, but I just think it's a testament to New York that we pay twice to get a sow's ear, and I would prefer the silk purse. I love that.
Yeah, right. It's kosher at least.
There you go.
We got to make it kosher. But it's very, very interesting to me. I'm learning a lot in American history of even the background of all these things. What, though, coming to the future, present and future,
Yes.
what are the big issues
issue
you're working on nowadays?
Three big issues. The Hudson River is really right now. We worked on, and I was one of the people that worked on getting it to become a National Heritage River, But also, as
What does
Mark,
that mean when it's a national heritage?
when you have a national heritage river, it gets additional protection, it gets a little oversight. There's also funds and aids that you can actually, provide municipalities right along this corridor. It gets a lot of recognition. National Park Service, as well as in the Department of Interior, it gives a threshold of funding and appeal and sight, and as I say, an elevation within our national psyche. And also, it says that it is a part of our heritage. The Hudson River was the major artery during the Revolutionary War.
Right.
Had General Burgoyne succeeded at Saratoga and then marched and was able to get to New York, they would have cut the then country, the then nascent United States, in half. It's the equivalent of how the Union took the Mississippi during the Civil War. The Hudson River is that significant. It was the artery of commerce. It's what made Albany back in the day, for the Rensselaer Patroon. It made this country. It was it's probably outside the coast. The interior waterways and arterials are what really allow a nation to have depth and penetration and grow. And you can compare that to how the French started through the St. Lawrence Seaway and settled up in Canada, but because they did not have any other major interior waterways that they can exploit, they basically stayed up along, just that whole Montreal corridor going out to Nova Scotia, etc. But here we had the Atlantic coastal shore, we had the New York Harbor and the whole Atlantic seaboard, but you had this massive inland waterway, which is called the mighty Hudson River. And that allowed for depth of penetration for colonization to building this mighty nation and making it really valuable. When you talk about the roads back then were not the roads we have now.
Right.
They were the waterways. And the fact that you can get, medium scale barks up the Hudson River to move commerce and commodities back and forth, it allowed for a deeper penetration of settlement into the United States.
And that's how the Jewish community started up here, too.
Absolutely, absolutely.
With
traders.
Asser Levy, and he wanted to have a minion up here, and he brought up people from New York City because he was a trader, and he wanted to trade his goods here.
Absolutely.
But the times that he had to stay here, he needed a minion.
Absolutely. And the thing is that the entire, what they call truck house system, was the British trade system. This is how you move beaver pelts and goods and services back and forth. They had multiple purposes. The truck house system allowed for fortification, because that's why when you talk about Fort Edward and all these other places, the stockade building complexes along the Mohawk River, because that was another east-west corridor. So you had these forts and these things, but at the end of the day, Albany was the nexus, was the archstone, and it's a huge piece of our heritage.
So moving forward.
But moving forward, the threats
I think just from the back, I mean, just start from the back. I remember in the State Museum when I went there, they said when Henry Hudson came up, you couldn't even get through. There were so many fish and, now it's so polluted, but they're making it better, aren't they?
Well, no, the answer is...
Would you drink water from the Hudson?
The answer is many municipalities do, but the point of the matter is they have to treat it with all sorts of chemicals. And every time you treat something, there's often trade. I call chemical treatment deals with the devil, You're always taking some sort of risk. You're taking extra doses of chlorine into your body when you deal with chlorinated water. But that being said, the fact of the matter is it's a question of value as a verb and a noun. When you think of value as a verb, you think of property and what's something worth. But something as a noun, it's a higher and deeper meaning. You cannot trade or sell it because you're talking about posterity, what you have to pass on. So when you look at the river from the noun sense of the word, you look at it as its bounty, the flora, the fauna, but it provides for generations, and that we're just nothing but stewards of the land. We talk about the book of Genesis. The Hudson River, from a book of Genesis standpoint, you can't put a price on it because man is a steward of nature and the creation. And not only for his immediate self and consumption, but even for future generations. And so from that sense of the noun, I see a heritage river in connection for all humanity, that it provides for all of us. But from the GE verb sense, General Electric, they use it as a verb, as a natural resource that they can exploit, that they can dump their waste in, and they could use it for the here and now without any consequence, and forsake it for all future generations. And this is the struggle and the battle at a spiritual sense, but also at a value sense. for the Hudson River. So I've been, as Mark knows, been one of the pioneers in that fight from the moral values, that noun sense of this river. To not only clean up, but we have a fundamental right as human beings to this natural resources. And no one corporation or human being is entitled to use it as its sewer. Right now, we have a toxic dump with a river flowing over top. There are PCBs that was dumped by a single source who is a responsible party, who has a moral as well as a real obligation to clean it up. Because at the end of the day, you know, we talk about the responsibility of the poor and people should fend for themselves and try to become industrious for themselves to at least provide for themselves. So if people go down to fish for the river to fend and provide for themselves, to eat the bounty of nature of that river. Now they can't do so. Because somebody,
now it's clean.
No, they did not. They dredged a couple of hot spots. So think of your body. You're covered in PCB oil, the nastiest toxic stuff. So you decide to clean what's in your navel and one nostril. What does that say for the rest of your body? It's still covered in the oil. So these are one of the weird things about positive law in America. With positive law in America, you can define what clean is. Under natural law, which is the common knowledge, we know what clean is. Cleaning a couple of spots and then declaring it under positive law clean at the expense of the rest of the body being soiled and filthy
Doesn't make it.
Doesn't make it. So under positive law, they can meet the strictures and requirements because this is what they negotiated in a contract that says if you clean this little spot in this 230-mile river and that little spot in the 230-mile river, it's clean. No, it isn't. Because 230 miles less these two spots are not clean. And it gets even better. They found within one of those clean spots that they underestimated the amount of toxins and pollutants that are there. But because under positive law and under contract, they said they remove precisely X tonnage, they can leave the rest of the filth there because under the agreement, under the contract, under the law, they have met 100% cleaning. And what happens is that gets sold in the psyche through the media and to the press, that the 230 miles of the river are clean. Exactly.
They tell you it's clean. I says, all right, it's clean.
Right, but this is the trick. Native Americans talked about the American or the European forked tongue, and the forked tongue is how we play with the law. We can play with God's law or positive law. Positive law allows us to declare corporations to be humans, and corporations have rights of speech, and human beings can be less than human or to be or not to be. So the point of the matter is these are weird things. We can be, my people under the Constitution, 150 years ago were declared under positive law 3/5 of a human being, in spite of the objective fact that we are human. So with positive laws, you can define, in the words of Bill Clinton, what is. And this is very dangerous. And as an environmentalist, as someone who cares about humanity, who cares about flora and fauna, who has a sense of the book of Genesis living in his spirits, and after all, the Spirit of God moved upon the water. So that which is sacred to human life, to me, has a higher value. You cannot put a price on it. So when one says it's clean, then I must ask them in the true sense and the spirit of what is clean, not according to what somebody's law or agreement is. General Electric has a moral responsibility to restore that.
Yeah, but then the federal government can come in and clean it up, and you don't have to have the private sector paying for it. I mean, GE is throwing up their hands and moving out of New York State.
But that's one of the fallacies.
But why don't we have the federal government just come in and do what needs to be done?
Well, the point of the matter is because you have a lot of political ideologies. That very private sector that allows them to throw their hands up talks about government interference and government oversight. This is a perfect reason why you need government interference and oversight, because left to their own avarice, people who want to make a quick buck and walk away, regardless of the mess, if it's profitable for them to retain their profits. Remember, the profit is what you get to retain. Yeah. It's not the cost of the mess. So what they're doing is they're leaving that behind for us, the taxpayer, to pay up. And I think that on one end, if they want to yell about, reducing taxes on them and their burden and how unfair government is, then they should be moral examples in the noun sense. not the value, the verbal sense. They should be moral examples of what they talk about.
I just want to put, because we are in the Jewish view.
I just want to say, so you would not drink the water in the Hudson?
Well, the thing is that we have what we call, in fact,
this is
there are
like,
a number.
This is like Hugh Carey saying, "I'll drink the PCBs at the Binghamton State Office Building."
I would not advise anybody to run down to the Hudson and dip a cup in. The answer is there's sewage. There's various water treatment plants that do their best to take out as many. I think the real big immediate exposure is the CSOs, the combined storm sewer overflows, where a lot of municipalities, should there be a major storm event, raw sewage flows into the Hudson. And given that we're now in the age of climate change, more raw sewage due to more storms will be flowing to the Hudson. I think that there are real threats there. But that being said, the persistence of PCBs goes from the Troy Dam, actually from Fort Edward all the way down to New York City Harbor.
Right.
So right now, barring any major scouring, that's not coming through. But to say that there's absolutely no traces of PCBs within people's drinking water, what municipality is actually going to pay for the test to see whether it's not? Who wants to alarm their municipality? Because if the people were really aware of what risk they're exposed to, believe me, politicians will be beating on GE to clean that mess up. But the point of the matter is ignorance is bliss. And so what people don't know, there's no testing to say whether there is traces of PCBs within the drinking water. But it's a good question to find out. People should know all the risks, especially if their municipality is pulling their water supply from the Hudson River. But the Hudson River is cleaner, thanks to the Clean Water Act, than it was in the early 70s.
Cleaning it up a
yes,
little bit.
yes.
But I want to conclude with a good word from the Jewish view. So, but just saying, you were talking about God in Genesis, so it got me thinking just the Jewish perspective, and this is not New Age, and the Sierra Club's 100 years old. We're talking something 3,000 years ago, and Judaism always said to take care of the environment.
Yes.
That something is so liberal that's thousands of years ago. You don't just knock down trees or just kill buffalo because you like the sport. And you don't just go around polluting things. So just a word for that, just totally consistent with the Jewish attitude of the environment.
If we live by the book of Genesis, the Genesis, I call it's God's environmental holy word. Period. Strip away the verbal sense of value in how we use this land, but the stewardship sense, it is right there. It is right there.
Okay, it's a good note to end on.
All right, so continue. We could say God's work, but good for the human beings, of course.
Absolutely.
And just keep on rolling and doing good with a lot of success and with good health.
Well, thank you.
Much continued success.